Now, one of the things that I found interesting were the fingerprints that seem to be of a different character than you would expect from human or monkey. So if we were considering that these things were constructed, or hoaxed, um, the fact that they have fingerprints is interesting.
Well, Garry, welcome back to the show. I always appreciate our conversations. So, how's your summer been?
It's been great so far. Let's see, late spring went to Africa for 3 weeks. Midsummer went to Nice, Monaco, met some interesting people there. Got on a ship, went around Italy and Athens, then to London, then to Brighton, then home.
Amazing, some wonderful places. Glad to see you visiting us over here in the UK. So, are you recharged and refreshed?
Mm, yeah, pretty much. It's been like I said, it's been a good summer. I like August because everybody is off grid, or as many people, a lot of people are, and so especially the Europeans, and so it's nice that I'm not being as bombarded as heavily.
Wonderful. Excellent. Well, Garry, I've got a few subjects I'd like to touch upon here today. I'm going to start off because Jesse from American Alchemy just put out this piece on the Tridactyl mummies from Peru, and it's brought the conversation back into the sort of zeitgeist, as it were. So, I guess, your thoughts would be really interesting on this. And you mentioned previously before we hit record that you'd not seen Jesse's documentary, I suppose you could call it, but they have announced that the DICOM files are available now. Can you tell us what DICOM files are and what can be garnered from looking at them?
Yeah, DICOM files, think of them essentially as a number of slices through a sample. If it's just a plain X-ray, it's just one flat image. But DICOM files are sort of a number of TIFF files all set one by one. I mean, they're not exactly that, so people please don't correct me. I'm trying to make it manageable. And so what they do is they give you essentially a 3D view of the image, and depending upon the number of other settings that might be relevant for the, let's say, MRI, you can turn on or off different features from the data collection that's there, and it lets you see things in 3D. And it's basically just a 3D animation file.
Wonderful. So it's not enough to do a full analysis on these mummies, but do you think it's a good starting point?
Oh, I think they're enough to do a very good analysis. It all depends upon the resolution of the imaging that was done. I mean, there are DICOM-ish like files for certain kinds of micro CT, or even near nano CT that can see within bacteria. So depending upon how much time you're willing to wait, you could uh, essentially analyze a specimen cell by cell, but it would probably take you until the end of time to do it. But by that time, the aliens will have landed and set up an embassy in Washington. So.
I mean, these mummies have been around for some time now. It's not anything new. Like I said, it's just been brought back into the conversation a bit more through Jesse's work. But, having kept your eye on some of the things that they've released, are there any red flags? Are there any positives, and in the same vein, negatives that you see?
Well, I mean, let's just start with the negatives. It's clear that some of the specimens, let's just generally call them that, are constructed. Now, whether they were constructed with intent to deceive or hoax versus were they made in honor of something and then buried alongside, or maybe they have nothing to do and they're just part of some story that's been passed down. I mean, the carbon dating seems pretty clear that several of the specimens are old, very old. Um, the ones that are the most interesting to me are the three large ones because the ligature and um, bone system and all of the how it's all put together. I don't mean that in a constructed way. looks as interesting as it could be, absent getting higher level resolution. Um, you know, be, there's lots of really good scientists in South America, and if they take a purely scientific approach to it, they could settle the matter in 1 or 2 years. But I think we've known about them for at least 6 years now, one way or another. They might not have reached the kind of global uh, understanding that, or at least view that there is today, but they've been around a while.
So, what positives do you see then so far?
Well, the positive, what I just said is that I've looked at the DICOM files, at least what's downloadable, and but I'm not an anatomist, so but I don't see anything obvious, and the anatomists and the forensic scientists who've looked at it so far say it's worth further study. The DNA data that's out there, I still have a hard time with because it's like with the Atacama mummy. Uh, when I first did the sequencing of that before I published the paper, there was a lot of DNA that just didn't look right. And so I had to go to experts who knew things about ancient DNA, or what I presumed to be ancient DNA. It was nowhere near as ancient as I suspected it might be. And so I literally contacted the guy who did the Neanderthal sequencing. And that's what good science is supposed to be. When you don't know the answer to something, don't just carry on. Go and find the right expert. So I found the right expert for preparing the DNA. He gave me hints about what I needed to do to correct some of the DNA sequences because of what happens to even old DNA. So that was what I did with him. Then the actual biology of bone structure, I needed an expert for that. And so it looked like what we had at Stanford was the world's expert in pediatric bone disorders, et cetera, et cetera. So by the time we were done, we'd assembled a team of 13 or so people that ended up on the paper, each of whom had expertise in the relevant areas, so that when it came to compiling the paper, um, I felt comfortable putting my name to it. People often say, and there's an individual out there, he who shall go unnamed, who happens to be bald, wears glasses, um, and his take on it was that I had purposefully and fraudulently changed the data, which is ridiculous because in fact it was the students who are analyzing the data, so he's really accusing them of fraud and not me. So the point of saying all of that is you can't do good science in under the public glare, because people who want results and updates every week or every other week, what they're doing is risking putting under duress the people who are trying to give the information, because you'll give information and you'll say, I think it might be this. And then, a week later, you might think something different, but it's too late because the Daily Mail has already said Stanford scientist sequences alien baby, right? And so you end up chasing yourself across the internet um, for years to come. And that's just not the way that science is done. When I do my day science in biology, um, when I'm ready to present a result publicly, even if it's not going to be we're not even close to a published paper, it's because I'm so sure of the result and that all the methods, et cetera, that were done, I feel comfortable giving a little result. It might not be part of a larger story I'm hoping to tell that would make a good paper in a top journal, but it's a snippet of information that's sufficient and behind which I will stand with all the appropriate scientific caveats. So, I people asked, I saw in your thread many times, have I been asked to study the mummies? And yes, I mean, I probably a few dozen times, uh, and by various people, but by serious people able to actually enact an outcome with the mummies or with money behind it. The first time I was asked, one of the requirements was that I would every moment would be filmed, and I said no. I'm not going to be filmed. This is not the Kardashians. That's not how science is done.
Sure.
My students certainly wouldn't put up with it, and Stanford wouldn't allow it. Um, anyway, and so that's the first part of that. And second was I said, look, I need a whole bunch of money, not for me personally. I've got, frankly, plenty of money. Um, and so I'd always like more, but I can get on. Um, and so the issue was, I estimated, I think online somewhere, about $5 million to do it right, which would be paying for postdoc researchers of various types and then bioinformaticians of various types. And essentially, the first thing we would do is collect all the data that's already known, figure out what's usable, what's good preliminary data that would cause us to go look in a next direction, um, and not set it aside, but put it aside in a way that said, okay, well, there's all that preliminary data over there. Now let's, based on this, do the next thing that we should do, and then everything needs to be collated: the instruments used, the methods used, etc., because it's all going to have to go into a peer-reviewed paper where you can't just make stuff up about what the methods were. You can't, well, I think I did this. No, that's not what you can do. And that's not what you will do if you're going to do it properly. So, um, and it would be probably 3 or 4 different teams of people that would need to be brought in to do it right. And so no one was willing to do it that way. And so I said, no, I won't. I won't do it. And I said, there's plenty of good scientists in South America, uh, but they clearly aren't being given the resources they need, nor the power that would allow them to keep results quiet as they're being generated. I mean, I could probably be able to get in the likes of the guys who did the Neanderthal work,
Right.
if they felt that I provided them sufficient information that would make it interesting to them and worth their time,
Of
and not
course.
get caught up in the circus that can be generated around these things. That's the reason why a lot of serious scientists who I know are interested in it, but won't touch it with a 1,000-foot pole because of the antics that go on. I mean, the similar thing happened. I'm just going to be honest with the Bugosphere. Jaime Maussan contacted me soon after he had recovered the sphere, and I said, okay, great. And he called me. He said, can you help? What should I do? And I said, well, you should uh, get a mobile X-ray machine. You can probably find one at a veterinarian. Do you happen to know a veterinarian? Because they would have one for doing X-rays of cows and horses and things. And you need this, and so he literally managed to get it almost the next day, and it sent me some of the first results. And I said, great, okay, so let's keep this quiet. Let's do this, and this, and now I need it at this angle and at this angle. And he said, okay, great, I'll do that. And then I woke up the next morning, Saturday morning, it was all over Twitter, and I just wrote Jaime, I said, this isn't what I thought we talked about. And his answer was, well, we need to get this information out because someone's going to suppress it. Well, here we are now, what, 6 months later? And where are we? Nowhere. you know, and maybe Jaime's doing something. I don't doubt his desire, but I said I won't be involved with this now because I can't trust that the information won't be ending up on Twitter the next day before we've had an even chance to determine what it is that is going on.
Yeah. No, it does. It does seem like everything's a bit backward. Like you said, it should be all done behind the scenes until you're ready to produce something. But, going back to the tridactyls, obviously these big ones with the tridactyl appendages, could they be simply some kind of already known mutation? Because, in Jesse's video, they're saying, look, there's no evidence that these have been, four, five-fingered and these have been cut off and tampered with. They are naturally three-toed and three-fingered. But isn't there a known mutation, GLI13 or something like that, that's known that this could be?
It can, well, I think is that might be the gene for polydactyly, or I don't know. There's probably multiple, but evolution doesn't work quite like that.
Okay.
In other words, yeah, you can have a mutation that might cause something like that, but three fingers, but there are other elements of those fingers that would have to be explained by one mutation. Evolution is I'll try this and then I'll add this and then I'll do this and then I'll do this, and the mutations will be spread all the way across the genome, each of them compensating for the error that one other mutation might cause. And so I just don't. I mean, yes, there's a mutation and that is in support of that they're different, but you need a full genome to look at all at once. I mean, the obvious thing to do that I'm surprised nobody's done. I mean, it really is so blatantly obvious. I don't know how many times I've said it. Go PCR out a whole bunch, polymerase chain reaction, amplify out a whole bunch of metabolic genes, things that we know should be there if it's somewhere in the the vertebrate family of genes, and do it from several sites over the body, and then see if the sequences line up with, let's say, alcohol dehydrogenase. Maybe they weren't drinkers, you name the gene. And so, trying to do the whole genome at once, it's a huge, huge issue. It can be done, but there are enough easy first steps that would be preliminary, that would allow me to go to friends of mine in the business of genomics and say, hey, look at this. This is really cool. Because there will be mutations that will be different and not in the, let's say, the primate line and not in the reptilian line, and would give confidence that there's next steps worth doing.
Sure.
One of the things I felt very uncomfortable about, even at the beginning, was saying, when they said, well, how much would it cost? I said, 5 million to do it right. I said, but, for 500,000, I could do the experiment that I just told you.
Yeah.
And then that would be a milestone that would maybe trigger more money. I mean, whenever I write grants or whenever I start a company, there's always milestone based outcomes you would expect. And especially in company formats, milestones come with additional tranches of funds. Uh, and so those are the easy things that could be done. But I just don't see anybody doing it.
Yeah. I mean, it seems that they've got these partial human DNA matches up to a certain percentage and then some anomalous percentages as well. But could it just be that there are some contaminations or even database gaps?
Yeah, no, I mean, DNA that cannot be matched to something does not mean it's an alien. I'm sorry. I mean, part of what you just said is true. It could be just fungal contamination of growth. I mean, the diatomaceous earth keeps them from drying or allows them to dry out, but it doesn't stop the internal contamination that would occur from rot inside of the body of bacteria, etc. And so, you know, there are sites in the body that are more protected from such contamination than others. For instance, the bone marrow, which is what with the Atacama, I asked for a piece of the rib so I could get the bone marrow because I felt that that would be the furthest away from the gastrointestinal tract where there would be a lot of bacterial contamination, uh, and still full of bone marrow, basically the immune system cells, that would allow me to come to a conclusion and not worry so much about contaminating DNA.
Mm. Do you think cases like this, discourage academics purely because of the way that it's been portrayed on the internet?
Absolutely. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, it's even discouraged me.
Yeah, so we're our own worst enemies sometimes, I feel, in this field. And it also seems that these claims of alien mummies are being backtracked slightly to it could potentially be a new unknown hominid, which again is just as exciting. But
I mean, that would be earth shaking to say that it's a new hominid and had nothing to do with aliens. And but I mean, the archaeologists who would want involved again are going to be running away. Plus, this is, as you might know, it's in a protected zone for indigenous peoples of the area who consider it, these caves sacred. And so there's a lot of checks and balances that need to be uh, set up before you go just chopping things up. Now, one of the things that I found interesting were the fingerprints that seem to be of a different character than you would expect from human or monkey. So if we were considering that these things were constructed, or hoaxed,
sure.
um, the fact that they have fingerprints is interesting. So there's these tidbits of information that still, give me, diplomatic hope that there's something there. But I don't even know who controls the things now. Is it
Right.
the Peruvian government? Is it some museum? Is it scientists? What access do they have? What are they allowed to do? All of these things are just, I haven't spent the time to look into them because I've got my own work to do.
Of course, of course. I mean, it just sounds like it's just one big complete mess. And rather than sticking on this subject, I suppose my last question would be to limit any more sort of damage to the credibility of them. What would you ideally like to see, or what do you think academia would like to see the next step be in legitimizing it any further?
Well, I think the the anatomists have had their say, and they say that they can't see it, any evidence of construction in the limited number of samples, the large ones, not the little puppet things that got pulled out at the Mexican Congress. Um, I mean, that did all the damage necessary to destroy the credibility of anything that came after. Um, the DNA damage, the DNA analysis that I just told you about,
Sure. Right.
that would be the one that I think should be done first.
Yeah, sort of set the gold standard for the next things to come after. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, and I'm sure, and I hope a lot of people that are watching and have been asking for your view on that are satisfied with that, and I appreciate it. So, but let's move on because this is the first time I've had you on the show since this kind of whole Skywatcher thing the start of the year. And I've spoken to a few people that were at the initial event last year. I even heard you cook them up a mean spaghetti bolognese one night. So
Hmm.
but it was only also a
Spaghetti. It
matter.
was spaghetti.
Oh, okay. Um, but it's only been a few hours since I think you tweeted out somewhat of an update on what's going on, and it does seem that there's been a bit of a quiet period, which I'm all about patience. I know that rigorous work takes time. So, what can you tell us about the kind of current understanding of what's happening with Skywatcher?
Well, we've got uh, a lot of data from multiple alleged sightings, um, and both radar and other kinds of data. And so, first, it was about getting the raw data files all put in one place, because some of the data was collected by James before there was officially kind of a Skywatcher. And so getting that data, getting the instrument names that he used for those, then getting the technical manuals of what the settings might be and how much of that information is collected in the metadata when you're collecting the thing. All of this is just the organization that you need to do before you do anything else. And then getting from the companies how it is that they parse their raw data, because some of these data files are put into, I wouldn't call them encrypted, but they're stacked into a certain kind of file structure. And I've seen the file structure, which is, you can think of it as a giant spreadsheet with
Mm,
headings and numbers for each of the columns, and time on the row axis. And so, we started looking at some of the data, and put it into, let's say, 3D tracking. And it's clear that there are some things about the data that we needed to go back to the vendor who makes the instrument and said, why is this and this and this happening, every few dozen milliseconds? And so, just getting an answer from these companies often when you don't even own the instrument. And so they're like, well, why should we give you the information about how our data is constructed? How do we know that you're not a competitor? Right. I mean, and so these are the kinds of things that we then contact somebody who has a behind the scenes access to this, so that we can, again, it's all of these little steps. And I'm sure there's somebody who's going to tweet, well, why don't you just put all the raw data out on the internet? For exactly the same reason, you don't put the raw data from ancient DNA sequencing, because people will make mistakes about it. And so, if I'm going to be involved, I'm not going to make any mistakes like that.
right.
So I'm sorry if people want stuff early. Um, I think, perhaps if I had been running the whole show, nobody would even know what Skywatcher is right now.
That's fair
And
enough.
we'd just be collecting the data in a fully stealthed mode. And but it's there's good reasons why they wanted some publicity, uh, and uh, you know, but I don't always get my way.
No. I mean, I think they've done a great job of balancing that scientific data gathering and then the kind of more entertainment glossy videos on YouTube that they've released. I think that's fine. I think that's good. And like I said, I appreciate that we have to be patient. Would you say that the data is exciting?
There's some interesting stuff in there. Um, the I mean, frankly, perhaps some of the better data that we have is just a couple of pictures from the ground of the helicopter with something about 200 feet in front of it, or I mean, I mean, it's a clear blue sky and there's an object right in front of the helicopter. And the people in the helicopter said at the time that they couldn't see anything, even though we could see it from the ground. And then, I mean, but meanwhile, all of their instruments are going haywire.
Yeah.
So there was an effect. So why couldn't they see it? Maybe it was just out of view. Who knows? Um, so it wasn't a lens flare, and it certainly wasn't a seagull, Mick.
Not in the desert, anyway. I mean,
Can't help myself. I can't help myself.
Oh, I'm all for it. I'm sure Mick would too, hopefully. James Fowler, we know he's left and moved on working with a new company. All the best to him. But am I right in saying some of the technology being utilized by Skywatcher was proprietary to him specifically? Maybe the dog whistle even. Is that still going to be able to be used by Skywatcher? How's that going to look going forward?
I'm not sure that we need the dog whistle at this point, and maybe there are ways to recreate it. Um, you know, I'm not party to the discussions around that, um, and so we'll see where that goes. I mean, James is not like gone and forgotten. I mean, I could signal chat him right now,
Right.
uh, and so he's there to help us. But my take on things is, uh, you know, James has a life to live and a family to feed, and maybe his focus isn't entirely on UAP. He certainly has an interest in it, and maybe he has, a company to build and an opportunity that actually we all see now in terms of detecting drones. And if he wants to run a company like that, then running around with a bunch of UAPologists might not be to that benefit.
Yeah, I think we get lost in it sometimes that we forget that there is a life outside of this subject. So I
Well,
appreciate it.
and a life you have to live. I mean,
100%.
Alex and I both have the means to do what we want when we want. Not everybody does.
Sure. Of course. And other psionic assets still being utilized like they were, last year. And I'd like to get your overall view on that, because that's, is that consciousness based? Is it adding a whole new angle to this very technical data driven collection system?
Hmm. Well, I mean, that's one of the reasons why sort of a sister operation of Skywatcher is investigating aspects of how psionic, so-called, alleged, might be part of this. I mean, do humans have an extrasensory perception? Uh, I mean, I've certainly seen plenty of evidence of it, that some sort of capacity exists. Now, is it is it scientifically validated in a way that some of my colleagues would uh, agree with? No, um, because it either hasn't been done correctly in terms of the kinds of studies, or whatever the talent is not something you can turn on and off with a switch.
Right.
So again, the technologies have only just become available that allow you to look at the brain in a way that allows you to see in real time changes that might be occurring when some of these kinds of claimed events occur. Uh, and so, we've all heard of CE5. Uh, and so certainly Skywatcher didn't invent that concept. Uh, and I don't think anybody in the last 100 years invented the concept of CE5. People have meditated and claimed to talk to the gods or other entities for thousands of years. often with plant medicine based help. Um, so, I don't know what it means, but it's certainly worth exploring. But I think there's perhaps a more scientific way to take the question. If you are an advanced civilization, perhaps you have access to a level of the universe where you can read things that are happening at a distance purely through technology, not through any magic potions or you know anything that would be considered paranormal. So if you're a million years ahead, you might have sensor systems that can read what's going on in a person's brain at a distance without it being consciousness based, whatever
Okay.
consciousness is. It could
Right.
be just simple science. Um, and, I mean, there have been papers that have just come out even recently about this kind of notion where things can be detected. We now know that, for instance, you can put, sensors on a person's head and read their dreams using large language models. That's just remarkable. 100 years, 10 years ago, people would laugh at you if you said you were going to do that. So, we're constantly living in this updated science fiction movie where capabilities that we can imagine uh, or we think are in the distant future are actually today now
Right. Absolutely.
and available. So I don't, uh, I never underappreciate human capability and smarts to accomplish something like this. And if you're a civilization that's a million years ahead of us, I don't doubt that you could do a lot. I mean, at that point, you're probably a Kardashev level 5 civilization.
Yes, indeed, indeed. Well, okay, last thing with Skywatcher then, for everyone out there that thinks that it's all falling apart, you can just, it is all going ahead. It's all being done the proper way. So there's nothing to worry about.
Yeah, and there might be a day when Skywatcher doesn't need to exist. The whole idea of Skywatcher is to show that something like this can be done, uh, and it can be done in a serious way. I mean, I frankly hope that if the UAP Defense Act, UAPDA Disclosure Act, is passed, because then the information that can be allowed to be out can be let out, and the stuff that needs to be kept secret stays secret. I'm not. I would never advocate for a data dump, and so call it controlled disclosure, or what have you. Um, it needs to be done the proper way, and if any of the claims are true, there are reasons why you want to be methodical about it.
Well, I'd like to stick with science, and Beatrice Villarreal recently put out a paper, and there's evidence potentially of these mirror-like, possibly artificial objects in Earth's orbit. I wondered if you had any thoughts on her work.
Yeah, I've read the papers, and they look fantastic. Again, I'm not an expert in the kind of cartography that she was doing, but uh, she did it right. In other words, she kept most of her conclusions quiet until the paper was published, or at least put on the archive. Still under review. Um, she double checked herself. She put all the methods there so anybody can take a look at it. And she frankly again did it the right way by making the science almost boring and simply didactic listing of the facts without sensational claims. Science papers should be boring. You can perceive them as being an exciting result, but they're not meant to be full of hyperbole. Uh, and I think she's done just a yeoman's job at this, and she's done a great job, frankly.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Wonderful, wonderful person.
I mean, it's exciting. I mean, think about it. You know, these these photographic plates were collected before we had satellites. Things are appearing and disappearing now. You know, the usual chorus of uh, pseudo skeptics are notably quiet um, because Beatrice crossed her T's and dotted her I's. Again, she's making no explosive claims about things. Let's just see where it goes.
Yep, couldn't agree more. Yeah, absolutely. Now, Garry, we're about 2 months away from the annual Sol Convention conference, and this time it's going to be held in Italy over here in Europe. So, any real goals or even reasons why Italy?
Well, I mean, because the Europeans were complaining they didn't want to come all the way to California again.
Fair enough.
And so, so we had it in Italy, and or we're having it in Italy. And so now the Americans are complaining they don't want to fly all the way to Italy. So it'll be a chance for a different venue, a different kind of setting, and perhaps more relaxed because it's in the Lake District. So I really recommend any Europeans get your tickets fast because it's going to fill up, and it'll be. I think the way to look at it is both the prior Seoul meetings, there was such a positive air amongst the participants that people who are, let's say, relatively new to the framework felt that they found their common kin, and that there could be discussions about this matter uh, in a mature setting. Uh, I'm excited about that.
Does Sol have any long-term goals at the moment as it's evolving?
Um, I don't think that we've changed much from what it is that we're wanting to do. Um, it's pretty much. I mean, look, I'd love to be everything, but I think the the goal of being seen as a leading organization to push forward the discussion in a broadly academic sense is different, say, than SCU, which
Hmm.
is interested in pushing it forward in a purely scientific sense, is different than the John Mack Institute, is different than Unhidden, which is doing experiencer and trauma. John Mack Institute being around experiencers is different than MUFON, etc. Um, but so I don't feel that having more organizations is a problem. To the extent that we can, we're trying to organize and coordinate amongst the various groups who want to participate in discussion to say, hey, we have volunteers who want to do this, but we're not doing that. So can we hand them to you? Do you have any volunteers? I mean, John Priestland and I have been talking, for instance, because I get a lot of emails asking for, uh, let's say, uh, medical help or clearly psychiatric help. So, John's a medical psychiatrist, I think. But so he can advise me on things that I don't know anything about. And so I want to make sure that I construct an answer to the dozens of emails in this regard in a way that respects the request, but doesn't offer medical advice because I'm not an MD. And even if I were an MD, You're not supposed to offer advice through email. And so, I think we're kind of in a time where the groups are consolidating their positions and making sure that they can move forward. And so it's kind of like, moving up the scale carefully. Um, and what's exciting, I think, most to me are the number of officials around the world and officials within the US government who are notably talking about the matter.
Right.
And saying, some of them coming right out and saying it. There's something here. I mean, if that isn't disclosure, I don't know what is. Look, there's people who still think the Earth is flat, and so I don't have a problem with where things are today, because I feel like even the people previously who didn't want the UAPDA to pass because there was eminent domain in it are now more comfortable because the eminent domain language has been buffered a little bit, which is the right thing to do. And so, we'll see who tries to get in the way. But the world's not in the most stable position right now. And so it is fair to ask, is this matter important enough given everything else that's going on? Um, Frankly, I never think that kind of language or excuse is ever a reason not to do something important.
Right.
Uh, but we have to recognize that the people who we've elected to be in power or to make decisions for us have a lot on their plate. I mean, I can barely answer my own emails. Never mind do all the other stuff that people ascribe to me. Yeah, but by the way, I have, like, as far as most people are concerned, they think that I have like some lair in an Antarctic cavern somewhere where I'm doing all this, all my research funded by the deep state.
Right. Well, yeah, that's laughable. But well, Garry, listen. At this point, I'd like to jump into some questions from social media. Before I ask the first one, I just want to urge everybody: if you look in the description of this video, I will be placing the Soul Foundation website where you can go and get your tickets if you're interested in attending the European conference in October in Italy. And also, I will post the link to the Tridactyl's DICOM data as well if anyone's interested in going to take a look. So let's jump into some questions here. The first one comes from The Unclassified on X. If you were to design an experiment that treats consciousness as a measurable force in physics rather than a byproduct of biology, what would be your first hypothesis to test?
Oh my! As a measurable force. Well, I mean, I think there's two ways. I mean, if a measurable force is, can you see something at a distance? The remote viewing experiments have already been designed, well designed by people. So, just go look up how Puthoff and others have done that. If you're interested in psychokinesis as a measurable force, then there's other people who've done those kinds of experimental designs. If you're interested in telepathy, then there's lots of ways that you can measure that. Um, Try to, at least. Whether you can convince anybody that the results are real. I mean, I've seen experiments done recently with so-called telepathy, and I can't explain how it happened. Assuming that everything I'm seeing is real. I think perhaps the most important way to consider it is, consciousness as intent. Look, I can use my consciousness to make this pair of scissors move around, right? So
True. Yeah.
the question is whether perception of reality creates that reality. And there's lots of discussion about that. The whole question of intent, that these so-called synchronicities that seem to occur, that the stuff that you need seems to show up just at the time when you need it. Um, and I've had that happen to me many times in my life, and perhaps it's just coincidence and observer bias that I'm paying attention when I want something, and so I think it's magic when it happened, whereas it has nothing to do with anything other than coincidence. Um, so it's a great question. I think um, there's other people. That's $100 million set of experiments.
Right. Yeah.
You know, I mean, people have tried the random number generator uh, effect, where if you have a random number generator, can you make it more or less? Uh, I was watching a short video by Tyler Henry the other day, the Medium, and he was recounting how prior mental bias, that you believe in psychic power versus you don't believe in it. Um, that those who don't believe in it, when they try to guess some random thing, they're more wrong than statistics should allow, as opposed to those who believe in it, they're slightly more able to do something than statistics should allow. So almost like your intent uh, creates an outcome um, subconsciously. So almost like you have this aura around you that creates your local reality.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
I've got to go. I haven't seen it. I have to
Sure.
go and look up that data. But
Yeah, no, wonderful, wonderful. I'm going to butcher this. I've tried it every time. UAP Tech asks, knowing what he knows about the Corate putamen, does he intend to pursue public data collection from experiences and go for peer-reviewed publication?
um, yes, uh, and it's being done, um, but we're starting very slowly. I'm being careful because I'm trying not to put anybody in a difficult position. Uh, so yes, it's being done. Again, it's always a matter of funding. Like even just the materials that I am analyzing or that I've agreed to analyze. People are like, oh, when is Garry ever going to do this? Well, if you want to deposit $50,000 in my bank account that I can, you know, for my lab, so that I can do the experiments, that would be great. So short answer is, when the money's available.
Sure, sure. Just a follow up from me on that is, will it be using a completely new data set to previous studies that you've done?
Would it what? Sorry.
Would it be using a new data set of experience or records and
Yeah,
data
I
from?
think I think you need, for instance, for so-called experiencers, you need some kind of validation protocol as to, you know, was there another person who saw the event at the time of the event? Um, Frankly, I would want to use a lie detector test on people to make sure that they're telling the truth. Um, you know, because that would be at least a filtering device. So that would be the two things. And then you want to do a psychological exam on the people. But once you're starting to get into this realm, now you're talking about requiring institutional review boards. meaning to make sure that you're doing things ethically. And if you're doing a psychological exam on people, uh, they have to be blinded. You have to do HIPAA because nobody wants their psychological exams out there on the internet, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these things start adding up the costs. I mean, you know why drugs cost so much? Not the stuff you buy in the street corner, uh, but drugs cost a lot because the clinical trials have so many built-in safeguards for the patient that it just ups the the requirements, and then um, drugs get pulled in clinical trials very easily because side effects with people.
The Lucid Lens says, I remember a year or two ago hearing Garry speak about work a colleague was working related to a shadow biome. I recall his excitement around the discovery and was wondering if there was any update and a potential connection to non-human intelligence.
Yeah, he wasn't a colleague. He was a wildlife and is a wildlife uh, not tourist, basically somebody who takes ranger, let's call him, uh, in in South Africa or Zimbabwe, I forget which. And so he had images of things that looked odd with a drone. Um, and so I actually paid for a new drone and camera for him, and sent it to him, out in his locale. Uh, so he's put all this stuff out on the internet. I don't know where it is, and again, I was excited about it and still am, but again, it requires more people to get involved and uh, you know help pay for it. There's only so many drones I can buy. It was like $7,500.
But you say he's already put some information out online. Are you able to give a name or anywhere we
I
can
don't
maybe go and?
remember his name offhand, and,
Oh,
and it's
okay,
not secret.
okay.
Um, there's it's pictures of these objects kind of moving, and they're often associated with fires. And so people have said, "Oh, well, this is just ash." Well, ash doesn't move at 50 miles an hour, and they're pretty clearly they're very odd, very odd. And so again, they're in this betwixt and between where you're looking at them and you're going, I don't understand that. It's really interesting, and I'm not willing to just dismiss them as flying ash. Because so it's interesting.
It does sound it definitely. If you do remember, please message me on Signal because I'll be interested to
I'm
check it
terrible
out.
with names. I can
That's all
remember methods and ideas since I was 5 years old.
right.
Names, I'm terrible at.
No problem. No problem. Frog Machine asks, what do you think is occurring during a full release dose of 5-MeO DMT?
MEO DMT. Now, that's a different one than regular DMT, if I remember correctly. That's um, the methoxy DMT is a wholly different experience, I understand, from regular DMT and ayahuasca. Um, and so let's just say DMT rather than because what do I think? Uh, at if I put on a fully mainstream scientist's hat, I think you're accessing the imagination core in your brain that helps you generate dreams. And, all the psychedelic uh, fractal geometries that are seen are just simply a uh, derivative of how the brain functions somehow. And that's putting on my mainstream hat. If I put on my, you know, woo hat, I should get that woo hat. Um, and I might imagine that allows Roger Penrose's and Stuart Hameroff's microtubules to access some other level of reality that our upper level brains don't access. I mean, you have to remember that every single one of your atoms sits in space time, and the components that make up those atoms aren't even solid. They're just vibrating objects as best as we can think of them. And so they're sitting in a substrate and down in a realm where we don't even understand how it's operating. And so to think that we understand how all these particles might or might not interact when we can't even explain quantum entanglement fully uh, is just it's just typical human arrogance. So I mean, entanglement is real, meaning that there's somehow access from this point to another point on the other side of the universe if two particles were entangled. So um, there's some kind of communication, maybe a quantum physicist would tell me it's not really communication, Gary. It's something else. But um, so I don't know. It kind of excites me to think that there might be some other way that our brains operate in space time than the simple mechanics that we learned in Physics 101 as as kids. I mean, I perceive you, and my meat brain sees a guy uh, in front of a microscope, but in reality, you're just a bunch of vibrating objects in space-time that my brain reduces to something sufficient enough for us to interact. But we're interacting via quantum waves.
Yeah, interesting. Well, do you know what? I had a lot of people who were asking things completely outside of your work and of UAP and just generally curious. And so this one kind of sums it up, and we'll end on this one. G asks, what does he do for fun?
What do I do for fun? Um, well, I go to the equivalent of raves.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
I have a lot of fun there. As
No
everybody
DMT,
knows.
though.
No, 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 no drugs. Um, Alcohol. Uh, so I go. I mean, I was in a giant party in Mykonos last end of last summer. I brought three of my best friends. I rented a villa and flew them all out, and we had a blast. Um, it was what's it called? Excelsior Party. It's a gay rave. It's gay. So I had fun there. It's a beautiful setting. Um, and so do that. I have my plant collections.
Yes, I was going to say,
Uh,
I see that on Instagram.
yeah, my plant collections, and I play video games occasionally.
Amazing. Favorite game at the moment? Anything?
League of Legends is my favorite.
Okay.
It's something to just kind of turn your brain off. I'm terrible at it, by the way.
It
Absolutely
doesn't matter.
terrible.
It's the escape. It's the escapism. I get it. I absolutely get it.
I,
I really
I've
do.
never gotten out of bronze level for
Okay.
more than a few games.
Right.
There's about
Wonderful.
10 levels above bronze that
Yeah.
are way out of my league.
Well, listen, Garry, I just want to thank you. As always, it's always an honor to speak with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.